Okay, so we're gonna start now. Thanks everyone for coming. And just so you know, everyone, there's free food right behind you. There's free pop in the fridge. Depending on what
free
you want.
weed as well, I think.
Yeah, we're in Vancouver.
Just for the middle section.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. In the back also, there's a little box for donations. We asked the suggested donation is $7. So that's right back there. So yeah, do you want to just jump into the
Let's go.
interview? Okay, so
Hit me with your hardest.
yeah, so
question.
we'll start off just with some question and answers. So my first question to Lloyd is, you already have your YouTube channel, you have JW Survey, so why would you write a book? What made you write the book?
It's a good question. So the book is obviously the latest thing, but I began writing it in the winter of 2012. So that actually predates the YouTube channel in a way. So when I first started with my activism, that was in 2011, and that was a few months after waking up. I started doing research, I started feeling free to kind of post on forums, but I knew I had to operate under a pseudonym. I chose the pseudonym John Cedars, and I just wanted to get involved in some way. And I wanted to tell my story as well. So I started doing that by writing a book, and that was in the winter of 2012. And I kind of knew when I first started writing it that I would have to also live the book during that process, so that my story was unfolding at that time, and I would probably need to wait a while to see how the story ended. And when I started at that early period, I thought that the kind of happy ending of my story would be my dad waking up and us having this wonderful family reunion, and isn't it great now that we're all awakened? And that never happened. But what did happen, and which I hadn't even thought about, was that I rediscovered my sense of community, and I built bonds of friendship outside of the organisation. And I think writing about that, in a way, that makes for a better ending than my dad waking up, because that's something anyone can have. If anyone, if they're willing to put forward the effort, if they're committed enough, can build that sense of community. And so I'm glad that was the ending instead.
Yeah, that's great. And follow-up question to that is, what part of the book did you find the hardest to write?
The hardest part of the book to write was, the hardest emotionally to write was the part where my mum died. When I was writing that part, I can remember having to kind of get out of the house and get some air, a few times, and just kind of process things, because it's one thing to kind of have those memories and to even talk about those memories to someone, but to put those memories in writing and kind of immortalize them in words, that was a very interesting and draining process in many ways. The most challenging part of the book to write, in terms of how difficult it was probably the very last, not the last chapter in the book, but the last chapter that I wrote, because I wrote it kind of back to front, and I saved the hardest chapter to the last, and that was the judge, the chapter on Joseph Rutherford. And I saved, it's just my creative process, I saved the hardest work till the very end, and I wanted to do that chapter justice, because I knew there was so much material to work with. So yeah, that was difficult.
Yeah, that's great. And another question, not everyone might be familiar with your story. I just wanted to ask, what was the first kind of thing that made you have doubts?
So I went through two phases of doubts, one when I was 20 and one when I was 30. And when I was 20, I was asked to do a job at the convention, which was take the speakers to the platform. So for the first time, I had felt like I was kind of going places in my career in the organisation. And at that convention, a book was released called Pay Attention to Daniel's Prophecy, which I was really excited about, because I thought, finally, this surely cannot be as batshit crazy as the Revelation climax book, maybe I'll understand it, you know. And so I really dived into it, and what amazed me was that as I got towards the end of it, I found myself doing something which I really didn't expect, and that was to consciously disagree with what was being said, and to think, well, it really sounds as though they're just kind of making things up as they go along and shoehorning events in history into their narrative. But as all witnesses are encouraged to do, I kind of buried those doubts, I put them to the back of my mind. Then my mother died, and of course, when someone dies and you're a Jehovah's Witness, what you're expected, or what you're told, is, well, she's not quite dead. She's still alive in Jehovah's memory, and the way for you to see her again is to be the best Jehovah's Witness you can be. So that really kind of put my doubts to one side. And it was only when I was 30 and my wife and I moved to Croatia that I was finally unplugged from the constant stream of indoctrination. And then I started thinking, hang on, what were those doubts again? And that started the whole process.
Yeah, that's great. Another question to kind of change the subject was, you recently were at Warwick. I don't know how many of you saw on Facebook, Lloyd posted some funny pictures of him at Warwick. So I just want you to tell a bit about your story there.
Yeah, so if you're interested in my channel, there's I'm going to be doing a video on this, my trip to Warwick. We actually went there because we wanted to shoot some B-roll for the documentary I'm working on, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later. And I wasn't fully expecting to get in. I thought I might have problems. What amazed me about that was how friendly everyone was. I mean, the guy on the gatehouse, it was quite an intimidating situation because you drive up to the gates and there's a guy sat at a desk behind a window and there's a little speaker and you have to speak into the speaker and he's kind of communicating with you. And I said, hello, I said, I'm here on holiday from England. I'm with my good friend Peter Yike, who used to be a Bible student, and some of you will know I interviewed Peter on a previous video. He is actually a former Bible student. That religion still exists, followers of Charles Taze Russell. And he had relatives who'd worked on the photodrama of creation. So I said, my friend really wants to see the exhibit on the photodrama of creation. I am not a Jehovah's Witness, but I have relatives who are. And that's true, just is. And I'd really like to take a look around. And the guy whose name was Gus said, "Can I ask for your name?" So I said, "My name's Lloyd Evans." And he said, "I think we can work with you, Lloyd." I was thinking, that's an odd choice of words. And anyway, later he came up to the car and he said, yeah, you can go through and just speak to my friend on the desk. We went in and everyone was just so friendly, and actually this was one of the reasons why we went in the first place, because we're working on this documentary about Jehovah's Witnesses and we figure it's just journalistically wrong to do a film on a religion without incorporating people who genuinely believe that religion as much as possible, for better or worse, and capturing who they are as people and what they believe. And everyone was just so nice, and it really kind of drove home to me that these are people who just do not deserve to be in a cult. And they're on the coalface, they're the ones who are really wasting their lives in this kind of compound. Beautiful, beautiful building. It was fascinating how when you walk into the visitor part, it was absolutely packed with Jehovah's Witness tourists. But what you notice is that the area that they want you to see, where all of the displays are, it's almost like it's hermetically sealed from the business end. So you see, again, what they want you to see and no more. But I don't want to give too many spoilers. So I'll just tell you there is a video on its way and I hope you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of reminds me of the North Korea.
Yeah.
They do the tours and only show the certain areas. So my next question is, I kind of just wanted to you to explain your philosophy on activism and non-aggressive activism and aggressive activism, in your book you used that illustration about the bridge. Just wanted you to speak about that a bit.
Yeah, so well, first of all, I'll say that everyone has different opinions, and that's one of the beautiful things about getting out of a cult, is that we no longer have to agree with each other. So I don't expect everyone to agree with me on this, let me just say that, but I've just found that when you're having a conversation with someone in any walk of life, if you try and thrust your opinion on them, or basically impose your opinion or superimpose your opinion on what they're saying, it's just human nature for the barriers to go up. It's very, very difficult to change your mind on something when the facts are kind of flying at you, even if it makes total sense. It's just the way the human mind works. And I found in my own experience that just being reasonable and treating people with respect and giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming that they're basically nice people is a very effective way of reaching through. And I've also found that conversely, if you're not respectful and if you are aggressive or confrontational, it actually does more harm than good. And particularly with apostates, the Watchtower trains Jehovah's Witnesses to think of apostates as mentally diseased, as horrible, antisocial individuals. And the more stereotypes you can obliterate by just being a nice person, I find the more walls you can break down and the more people you can influence. That's just been my experience.
Yeah, that's great. And to go with that, what suggestions would you have for the audience members to just raise awareness about witnesses? Like what kind of things could they do if they have family members that are in, things like that?
I think if you have a believing witness relative, the first thing is to recognize that there are no magic bullets. If it was possible to just flick a switch and let people know that they're in a cult, then we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, because Watchtower would be a thing of the past, So that's the first thing. I just try and, in my own experience, similar to what I said before, just seize hold of any opportunity I can seize hold of to show that I'm not the person they think I am, and to show that I'm a kind, patient, loving person, even though personally I'm not any of those. I deceive people, basically. But no, just I think in any walk of life, it's important to just be nice and to grab opportunities to be nice, and just show as well that you're living a happy, contented life. I mean, why would they want what you have if you're always kind of miserable and down and what have you? So try and kind of lead through example. In the case of my wife woke up a year behind me, and we were having conversations once, and I kind of mentioned offhand, when I woke you up, and Diana said, "You didn't wake me up." and then she kind of, after a while, kind of thought, actually, maybe it's more than a coincidence that you woke up and then a year later I did. It's more complicated than that, I know. I mean, I was very fortunate with Diana that I married an intelligent woman who doesn't appreciate being lied to and wants to know what the facts are. But my approach with her, if that's of any use to you, was to be patient, and again, not thrust information on her, and let her come to me with questions, because when you're in that kind of relationship, it's inevitable that there will be questions. I mean, you're basically changing the parameters of the relationship when you leave the religion, so expect conversations. And when those conversations come, you need to be ready as much as you can be. Obviously, there were times when I would make discoveries. What? The United Nations were in league with Watchtower? And that genuine surprise, I couldn't help but mention it to her, but she could see that it was a genuine thing. It wasn't me trying to influence her or manipulate her. So that's my only advice, to just be nice, show that you're a better person for being mentally free, and be patient.
Yeah, that's great. And the next question, first I'll ask the audience, is how many people here, just raise your hand, if you woke up as a result from the internet? That's interesting. So my question was, what hope do you see in the internet age that will change the witnesses? Do you see the internet age having a big effect on the future of the witnesses?
Yeah, I think Google's changed everything. I really do. Before Google and before the internet, you had to jump through a lot of hoops to find information about the witnesses, and now all you need to do is type in Jehovah's Witnesses on Google and the information comes to you, you know. So I do think Google's having a massive impact, and I think it's behind much of what we're seeing at the moment in terms of downsizing and in terms of the really kind of rather more militant approach Watchtower's taking when it comes to shunning and these bunker videos, and it's almost kind of forcing the organisation to become more extreme and more desperate for people to stay, because I do hear as well anecdotally of attendance going down at Kingdom Halls and that kind of thing. So yeah, it is having an impact.
Great, so now I just want to ask the audience if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. Should I bring the mic over?
I'm only aware of him having a son named, I think, Malcolm.
Yeah.
No, I didn't trace them down. It would be, you know, interesting, but my book's 800 pages as it is, and I fear that we could run into it could get. I just basically didn't have the space to include that information, even if I found it. But I agree, it would be interesting to know what became of Malcolm and any descendants he may have had. That's an interesting question, because obviously I do the rebuttals, and I can remember my very first rebuttal was essentially just me saying, oh my goodness, what an amazing opportunity this is, because finally ordinary witnesses get to see the man behind the curtain and how ridiculous they are, and that's exactly what they've seen. But what fascinates me is, I don't know whether you've had a chance to talk to believing witnesses about the rebuttals. Almost every anecdote I've heard, and I've spoken to people who are still attending meetings, who are just on the verge, in the process of waking up. I spoke to one lady who actually, she was still attending meetings, and she bought 2 copies of my book as part of the Indiegogo campaign. A remarkable woman. We met her in the UK, and one of my first questions was, how are the brothers receiving the JW broadcasting episodes? And she said they love them. They absolutely love them. And I've heard the same thing from someone else who emailed me. He has parents from Scotland, and I don't know whether you know anything about Scottish people, but they take no nonsense whatsoever, usually. And his parents are usually very skeptical about most things, but again, he said they absolutely love the JW broadcasting episodes. I think sometimes it's easy to forget how, when you're indoctrinated, your brain has a way of making really terrible things appear good, you know, and interesting, even with material like that, which is so obviously talking down to its audience as though they're all school children. It's astonishing. Oh, no, I said a musical. So there should be Rutherford the musical with Nazis and with women and Bible characters being resurrected in San Diego. And what an amazing musical that would be. No, he was a remarkable person, and as I mentioned before, that chapter was the hardest chapter to write, only because I wanted to absolutely nail him, and I wanted to do him justice. And while I was writing it, I was backwards and forwards from my bookshelf. A lot of you will remember my bookshelf from my videos. The higher up you go, the older the books get. And so I was constantly, I didn't want to just go off quotes from JW Facts and what have you. I wanted to actually see the ink and paper myself and be absolutely certain that that's what he'd said. And it was absolutely astonishing. And I tried as well with the Rutherford chapter to bring together as many different sources as possible. So I quote from a thesis that was written about the years when the the organisation was incarcerated in Atlanta Penitentiary, and the whole controversy around that, because there was some interesting information in there as well that I just felt needed to be included. But what a remarkable man, and isn't it interesting how one person's personality can be embedded in the fabric of a religion to the degree where you're not allowed beards in 2017, long after he's died. But because he didn't like beards, because it reminded him of who'd gone before him, that's basically why men can't have beards. Astonishing. Yeah, I really hope it will be at least next year, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, because I've got. Would any of you like to see the sizzle reel for it? Yeah, we're going to show that a bit later, but I think you'll enjoy it. It's 3 minutes long, and we've basically made it so that we can go out and approach investors, because we want to kind of do the traditional line of funding and see where that takes us before we need to start thinking about crowdfunding. So that you guys are among the very first people to see it. It's been seen in LA, it was seen in Portland, it was seen in Seattle yesterday, and you're the 4th event to watch it, so I hope you'll enjoy it. The short answer is no. If Dad wakes up, or if Hannah wakes up and wants a relationship with me, they know that they will be greeted with open arms. But it has to be on condition that they accept me for who I am, and who I am is an activist. And I've always been that way. In fact, I do have a little. I do sometimes have exchanges with my sister, and in one of those recent exchanges, I reminded her of a time when we were both at high school, when she was being bullied by a big old guy, and I saw my sister being attacked basically by this guy, and I threw myself at him. And I was no fighter by any means. I was just basically the high school geek. I had no combat skills whatsoever. And we ended up in this embarrassing situation where me and this big brute were kind of rolling around in the grass, and all of the contents of my pockets were spilling out onto the grass, including diagrams of the Starship Enterprise and everything you can imagine. It was a very embarrassing spectacle. I think eventually my sister fled the scene out of embarrassment more than anything. But she remembers that, and I said, that's who I am. If I see a bully, I'm going to want to go for him, because I don't appreciate it, and I don't appreciate people being lied to. I've even kind of hypothetically asked the question, if I could go back in time and wake myself up as a teenager and get myself out of that cult and save myself like a decade or so, would I do it? And probably most people in the room would say, hell yeah, I'd do that. In my own personal case, I don't think I would, because I feel as though my experience has made me who I am, and it's put me in a position where I can contribute something in a cause where more voices need to be heard, if anything. So. All ages really are waking up. I was speaking to someone the other day, I think at the Seattle event, who was saying that she felt that her parents were too old. And I can imagine a scenario where if you're literally on death's door, and you've maybe got a believing spouse who is 100% in, and you wake up, I can imagine, it causing more distress, probably, going through the waking up process. But having said that, I have had people reach out to me who are getting on in years, and even though they're kind of in the twilight of their life, they still appreciate having that last chapter to themselves, that last chapter of freedom. I think I would be the same. I think I'd rather have any years I can get with freedom of mind. It's very precious. It would have been interesting to do that. I guess this has all been quite experimental because this is the first time I've done anything on this scale, and now that you've suggested that, I can do it in the future. I am actually interested if anyone can take it upon themselves to count how many people are here, because I'm interested to know which of the events won. So so Seattle is currently the winner with 54, and
56, 57.
oh, well, congratulations. When they had the numbers announced in Seattle, they were all whooping and screaming, and they said if we get beaten by Vancouver, expect them all to say sorry. They didn't really say that. How it impacted me? Well, yeah, what an amazing book, and I don't think that there will ever be a man like Ray Franz again, or a book like Crisis of Conscience again. He basically created something that he didn't need to create. He could have just had an easy life. You could tell that an element of him was happy to just stay a Jehovah's Witness, but he had the personal integrity to want to know what was true and what was not true. And he actually created something that could help generations that followed him. I think what he created with Crisis of Conscience was a truly beautiful work, and something that certainly helped me, and I'm sure helped probably the majority in this room. Yeah. I just wish I'd had a chance to meet the man. I think he died, was it 2011? Yeah. And that's literally a few months after I woke up, so I just missed him. I would really love to have the opportunity to shake his hand. Yeah. Okay, I'll do my best. If you haven't seen it, I've done a video, Jehovah's Witnesses and Child Abuse, in which I've tried to explain as simply as possible what the issues are. There's a number of reasons why child abuse has been found to flourish in Jehovah's Witnesses, and I really do not exaggerate when I use that word. There's better words I could use. The culture of secrecy, the attention to the two-witness rule, the way elders have so much power, the way elders, the culture of forgiveness. So you can be forgiven, and everything will be erased that you've done. All of those factors combine with Jehovah's Witnesses to create a perfect storm, where you have what's been phrased as a pedophile's paradise, where pedophiles can operate almost with impunity. Now, all of these issues were brought into the light with the Australian Royal Commission in 2015, which many of you will be very familiar with. And what's encouraging is that we now have kind of a critical mass of people who have made it their goal to stop children being put in harm's way in the organisation. So a few months back, was it 2 or 3 months ago, I attended a conference in London that was hosted by Reveal, and attending the conference were lawyers, were child abuse survivors, were activists, were people even from the government who were responsible in the kind of lawmaking, law enforcement process. And what's fascinating is that there is now so many people who want to work together to accelerate things. But just to give you an idea of how much work there is still to go, it really is not a done deal that this gets fixed. And just to give you one example, with the Royal Commission in Australia, that was a really intensive investigation of Jehovah's Witnesses, and only by dedicating those resources were we able to learn what we've learned. But we're having the same thing in the UK. I'm obviously British. We're having the same thing in the UK, but it was revealed at the conference by a representative from the police that the UK Commission would not be investigating Jehovah's Witnesses. They'd made that decision not to investigate them. And I actually stood up and said, is there any chance of that decision being reversed in light of some of the things that we're considering here today? And he said, that decision is not in my that's not in my purview to make that decision. But what's interesting is that just before I came on this tour, I had contact from one of the lawyers who was at the event, and she was saying that she is going to start a campaign to put pressure on the Commission to include Jehovah's Witnesses as an investigation. And she said, would you be interested in helping me with that? And I said, I'd be absolutely honoured to. So that's the kind of struggle that we're having, even to convince the authorities in some countries that there is something that needs to be done. But trust me when I tell you that there are some really good, dedicated, decent people who are working on this, and are working hard on it, and are working with each other to get something done. I think that, well, this is the crazy thing. I think that they're investigating like the Church of England and the Catholic Church. I mean, obviously, in almost any institution, there's going to be some level of corruption or some level of child abuse. But what strikes me, and what was very, very evident from the Australian Royal Commission, was not just the scale of what's happening, but the absolute refusal of the leadership to implement very rudimentary reforms to fix it, to the point where we had the most recent case study, the number of the case study doesn't immediately come to mind. There was a follow-up to case study 29, and you basically had the Watchtower representative saying, well, we can't fix that, we're not going to fix that. So that for me is the main difference that I see when I compare Jehovah's Witnesses with other religions. It's almost the pride with which they say, we're not fixing this, it's never going to get fixed. We believe we have a mandate from God to do this. So it's a really serious problem. But again, there are some good people working hard on it. This just doing this is is up there, you know. The most rewarding thing with my activism has to be when, and I've said this before, but it's just the way my mind works. I believe very much in in humanism, and in trying to leave the world a slightly better place than you leave it. And I do get occasionally contacted by people who will say, you know, you helped me wake up, or you helped my family wake up, or things like that. When I hear of someone say, you woke me up and therefore I'm not going to be indoctrinating my children as Jehovah's Witnesses, that I'm just saying that sends a buzz down me, because they basically get a blank canvas. Their lives will not be tainted by this religion, and the absolute thrill, the biggest thrill that I get is the thought of people who aren't even born yet escaping life as a Jehovah's Witness because their parents or their grandparents have read something or watched something. That's the biggest thrill for me, because as much as I enjoy anyone getting out, it gives me a big thrill. I just like the thought of the next generation being spared all this nonsense to begin with. I'm trying to forget about that. Actually, no. And this is actually interesting in itself, because I wasn't the best pioneer in the world, but I wasn't a terrible one either. You know, I had some decent presentations, but I just found that the ministry work was almost impossible, and it makes sense to me now, because if someone knocks on your door and says, I've got this fantastic insurance policy, you know, if anything happens to you, you'll get all of this money, and all you need to do is sign this contract. What you're going to say is, well, let me think about it. And then the door's going to close, and what's going to happen is you're going to go on Google, and you're going to find out everything you can about this company, and whether they've conned anyone, and what what the track record is. Why wouldn't people do that with Jehovah's Witnesses? Why wouldn't people do that with religion? And so it's perfectly clear to me now why it was such an uphill struggle. I did help someone to baptism. One lad who I still think back on with fondness, but he was basically, it was one of those situations where he was the son of a JW family, and the elders asked me to study with him. So I figure he would have wound up at JW probably one way or the other. I just probably did it maybe a little bit quicker. But so I try not to lose too much sleep over that. But I wasn't very prolific as a pioneer. I'm proud to say. Well, yeah, I can understand why you feel that way. My own approach is I am an atheist, and I don't think that there are good reasons for believing in the God of the Bible. But I do think I can understand that there will always be people of faith, and religion will always be around, because some people do, for reasons that I can't fully comprehend. But it's just a fact that some people do need religion in their lives. You know, when we're atheists, it's difficult for us to comprehend what it would be to be religious, you know, because it just makes total sense. But I guess when you're religious, you feel the same way about atheists. And I think what's important is that we're out of a climate where we all need to agree with each other, and where we all have to follow the party line and think the same thing. And we can reach whatever conclusions we reach in our own time. And I'm perfectly comfortable with people watching my stuff. And anyone who knows my videos will know that I make fun of religion quite a lot, and make fun of the Bible. But I don't expect everyone who watches my videos to get rid of religion. I think that religion will always be with us in some form, because I think that's human nature. Some people just seem to need it. It's a strange phenomenon with Jehovah's Witnesses, because it's like a split personality. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. On the one hand, they crave to be considered as a mainstream religion, but on the other hand, they just can't help being a cult. they can't help printing horrendous homophobic material and encouraging families to get broken up over things. So how do they stay under the radar? There's probably a variety of factors. I think with Scientology, it may sound like quite a cheap answer, but I think a lot of the fascination with Scientology is because of Tom Cruise. I think that's the kind of culture that we live in, where people are just obsessed with celebrity. And once people find out that Tom Cruise is a Scientologist, and these Scientologists are leaving, everyone wants to know about Scientology. With Mormons, I think there's been some really good material done by the makers of South Park with the Book of Mormon, and credit to them. I think humour is a fantastic device for dismantling the fear of cults. Cults hate to be laughed at. And if only we had, that's why I was saying about the Brotherhood the musical, if only we had something similar, so that people could realise, I mean, how many people who you meet in the street will know that JW men aren't allowed beards? They just won't know that, will they? So all of the crazy stuff's there, it's just not being properly exposed, and I guess that's why we shouldn't take it for granted that it will get exposed unless we do something. So that's why I try and do what I can. Yeah. That's a very good question. So with the Royal Commission, it isn't really a case of a verdict. The Commission's job is to find out what, if anything, is the problem. And once they've figured out that there's a problem, and in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses that they have, then it's basically down to the government how they take this information. So basically it's an information gathering exercise. It's not a case of there being a verdict or penalties or anything like that. And you know, it can be frustrating that it's like that, but it's very valuable, because lawmakers do need to have this kind of due process, this due diligence, to find out before they start introducing laws, for example, compelling organisations to report child abuse. I'm not aware of there being a similar thing for the United States or any other country, in fact, apart from the UK. I think in the United States there are other concerns as well with regard to the FBI. Frankly, I mean, how can it be that they're not busting down the door of headquarters to get this database? They have as much information as I feel they need. So it's another problem as well in the United States of trying to get lawmakers to do their work. And with Reveal, I know, speaking with Trey Bundy and speaking with his superiors, they've kind of reached a stage where they say, well, we've kind of done everything we can. We've reported on this as much as we've dedicated years to reporting on this, and we've kind of covered it from all conceivable angles. What needs to happen now is that the authorities need to get their act together, and that's just not happening. And it should happen. I feel frustrated because I think we should be able to take it for granted that they'll do something, but unfortunately we live in a broken world where not everything happens the way it should. So that's where we are at the moment. I'd just go on to atheist activism. And actually, I'm trying to think what my next book's going to be. This kind of connects with what we were talking about before. I think my next book's going to be more generally about creationism, because one thing that I enjoy doing is kind of delving into the Bible itself. I like kind of going to the source material, and I actually find it fascinating that only now that I'm no longer a believer do I really enjoy researching about the Bible and researching about archaeology, and I'm reading a book at the moment called The Bible for Grown-Ups by Simon Loveday, which is a fascinating book, and he opens by discussing what we know about the writers of the Bible, who actually put pen to paper. And it's fascinating that we know more about the writers of the Old Testament than we do about the writers of the New Testament. Fascinating book. So I'm thinking that my second book might be more generally about creationism and that kind of thing. I've not decided yet. I went to college. I actually studied art. It was a bit of a waste of time because I kind of got railroaded into doing this art course. I wanted to do computer graphic design, and I got convinced that this art course was the thing to do, and it turned out it wasn't. So I kind of wasted 2 years and got a meaningless qualification as a result. What do I do for a living? It's only very recently that I've been able to become a full-time activist, and I'm very, very privileged to do what I love for a living, thanks to the generosity of people supporting on Patreon and all that kind of thing, basically. But prior to that, we and still are in many respects running a translation business, so I still kind of manage that, but obviously it doesn't devote as much time as it used to. So we provide translation, Croatian, for the Croatian language. I think that, yeah, well, there's the photographic evidence. They I don't know whether you guys saw on Facebook, but they posted pictures on Facebook or someone posted pictures on Facebook of the arena in San Diego where they had the convention, and it's just a smattering of people. So either not enough people showed up, or they were really poor planners when in booking this massive stadium for such a small number of people. So you'd have to, I don't know all the ins and outs there, but it certainly doesn't look very good when you see the photographs. The other question was on the legality of shunning. Now, this is a tough one because I happen to be a very big believer in human rights. And one important human right is the right to freedom of worship. And it's just a simple fact that lots of religions have very, very strange, abominable rules. But people should have the right, if they want to act on those rules. So they should have the right, if they feel that they need to do something to make God happy. I wouldn't want to live in a world where they're banned from observing their religion in that way. Where we have a problem with shunning is that Watchtower is involved with the state in one way or another, either through receiving tax breaks or through receiving charitable status. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed up to by countries, in other words, by governments. So if a government is giving a religion like Jehovah's Witnesses tax breaks or awarding it charitable status, then I would argue it's complicit in anything that religion does that breaches human rights, and that makes the government involved in that. So that's an area that I think urgently requires looking into. I don't think any religion, well, I'm not a big believer in religions being tax-free anyway, but I think that any religion that breaches human rights in that way should definitely lose its tax breaks and should certainly not be called a charity. I kind of hope, I hope as a secularist that it's inevitable that they will eventually be held accountable when it comes to covering up child abuse and when it comes to breaking apart families through shunning. We need to fashion a society that works for future generations, and future generations won't thank us if they inherit a world in which organisations are free to cover up child abuse and put children in harm's way. So I like to think that the governing body will be held to account, and what was encouraging was at the Reveal conference we heard that there is a lawsuit in the making where the individual members of the governing body will be sued as individuals, and I nearly jumped through the ceiling when I heard that. But it's that sort of initiative that needs to take place, I think, to accelerate things. But I would hope, as a secularist, that it's inevitable that future generations will look back in horror that this was even allowed to happen in the 21st century. Yeah, I did. If you don't know, Gerrit Loesch refused a subpoena to appear on a court case, and in quite dramatic fashion, I should add, by denying in writing almost any connection with Watchtower, which I included in my book as well in the appendix, so that I could prove it. And it was that act of subversion that prompted, I think, at least that's the impression we were given, but it seems that Zolkin, that was like the last straw, and it's like, well, if you're going to do that, then let's go straight for the throat. Yeah. I do my best with the information I have to hand. I mean, I think it's chapter 5 in my book where I talk about Menlo Park and Bonham, Texas, where you had basically congregations that rebelled against Watchtower in some form or other. And it was very clear in both cases that it's Watchtower that pulls the strings. And as you say, Kingdom Halls are not owned by the congregation. They are led to believe that they own the congregation and are responsible for the upkeep. But the minute they do anything that's different from what Watchtower has in mind for them, they find out very quickly who the true owners of the Kingdom Hall are and who really pulls the strings. So I've done my best with that, and I also have kind of done my best with the whole stealth tithing arrangement, where organisations were essentially told, you're allowed to keep $5,000 in your account, send everything else to us, we'll have all that, thank you. Yeah, that was in a letter. All I would say on the financial side, first of all, is I have a number of Achilles heels, and one of them is anything to do with money and finances, and so I really struggle when it comes to crunching those numbers. But the sad thing is I don't have any numbers to crunch, because with the organisation there's zero financial transparency, which I think kind of says a lot by itself. We need to know where this money's going. I really try to avoid anyone being able to point the finger and say he's given a false prediction. I did, however, write an article, 10 Reasons Why the Watchtower May Be Imploding, and I gave a number of kind of things that you can look at, areas that you can look at, which it's fairly obvious that not all is well. And I probably need to do an update to that, because there's more things that have happened since then that point in very firmly in that direction. I think that there will always be Jehovah's Witnesses. I think you basically cannot kill ideas. That's why it's such a mistake, for example, to have such a thing as a war on terrorism, because terrorism is just a form of warfare. The real problem is the fundamentalist ideology, and you can't defeat ideas, that they are bulletproof. And so you will always have people who identify in some way as Jehovah's Witnesses, just as to this day you have people who think that Charles Taze Russell had something meaningful to contribute. There are still followers of the bearded wonder. And if while that's the case, we can be confident that there will always be Jehovah's Witnesses. But I just feel that Watchtower, something needs to change drastically with them, and they need to drastically downscale to something that matches Scientology an awful lot more closely, or I can see things ending up quite dramatically. It really wouldn't surprise me if they say that this is the Great Tribulation, because we're no longer free to operate, and we're no longer bringing in as much money, and the love of the greater number has cooled off. So, oh yeah, you can bet that they'll find some way of spinning it. Did I hear you say we're?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just take a brief break now for about 15 minutes. You know, there's refreshments at the back, there's free pop in the fridge.